Hello, welcome to Critical Witness. We are joined by Inonge, who will be on the screen momentarily. I just want to warn you a little bit that both Dan and I are totally unprepared for this conversation, so we don't really know where it's going to go, and Inonge is brave enough to join us, and we're looking forward to a conversation about what she does with her blog and YouTube and evangelism with women and anything else. So it could be a fairly open conversation. If you've got questions for us as we chat, feel free to put them into the live chat. It's good that you can be here if you're live. And if you're watching later on, feel free to put some comments wherever you're watching it and let us know what you think of the conversation. But with no further ado, Inonge, welcome to Critical Witness, the most organised and planned show on the internet.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great. So we kind of connected through Nay Dawson recommended your channel and connected over Twitter. And just be good to hear a bit about your story, which we've been hearing before we went live, but now we're going to ask you to repeat yourself. So who are you? And let's start with that one. And let's go with the first question we usually ask our guests. So why are you a Christian? And then we'll get a little bit of your story.
I'm Inonge. I'm originally from Zambia, so that's where I was born. That's where I grew up. And 16 years in August, I moved to Scotland. So that's kind of a bit with my background. My accent is a combination of everything and nothing at the same time. And it's interesting. Zambia is quite a Christianized country, if you like. I say Christian, like constitutionally and culturally. So I always kind of grew up with an awareness of understanding who God was, and came to faith at a young age, just by understanding the gospel, like the seriousness of my sin, and the need for forgiveness, and the need for trusting Jesus for that forgiveness. But yeah, I hit a bit of a bumpy ride, I think, when I moved to Scotland, which is one of the most, like, contrast to Zambia, one of the most secular places in the world, and just did not know how to answer many questions that were thrown at me. So it took a lot of working through that. So I would say I'm a Christian because I think that the gospel is amazing. It's true, and it's good. To summarize it, I could talk for ages about that, but I've really just found, as I've worked through all of those questions, big questions and issues, and some of which we'll maybe touch on tonight, I just think it's the best news ever. So yeah, that's my chat.
Awesome. Oh, it's good to hear that. And as we were chatting before, just the sort of transition phase of going from Zambia to Scotland. You mentioned it was a Catholic boarding school that you went to in Zambia.
Yeah.
So would you have identified yourself as a Catholic at the time?
No, I went to a Reformed Baptist church.
Oh, right. Okay.
It's massive contrast. Just to kind of paint the picture in Zambia a little bit. I think our parents, when they were raising us up, I thought that the best way out of poverty was education, and so that was kind of the most important thing. So, even Christian parents that would, Reformed Baptist, didn't have an issue, you could say, most of the time, sending you to a Catholic school if you were going to get a good education. So really, I was in that school not because it was Catholic per se, but because it was a good school, and you needed to achieve higher grades, and it just gave you a best chance, I guess, in life of going to a good university, getting a good career, the path out of poverty, as it were. So that's how I found myself in the school. And I don't know, maybe it did have an impact. I was only there for 2.5 years, and then I kind of moved to a school which was the opposite of all of that in Scotland. So I don't know if it had an impact on my faith. I wouldn't say it had a negative impact. I never really believed. I think I had quite a strong foundation of what I believed in terms of understanding the gospel and the law and the gospel distinctions. But maybe it wasn't that helpful for preparing me for hard questions about what I believe and why I believe it, because I don't know. It was just assumed we're all Christians. I mean, RE lessons were like, double the time. I'm pretty sure you got like triple. Like here in Scotland, you like, get half a class. In Zambia, it was like, let's do it 3 times a week. Like, so even that, like we were memorizing Bible verses in RE. Like, I think we learned about other religions for like 0.01% of the time. And then it was just like the Bible. Like, so, yeah, it was Catholic, but I don't know, in a weird way, like we were still like learning the Bible and doing all of that academically. So yeah, took a lot of shifting to switch from that to like, God isn't real.
It's quite the contrast, isn't it? Because I was trying to think, as you were talking about going from Zambia to Scotland, I was trying to think like what would be a more extreme move. And it's not obvious. I think Scotland must be in like at least the top 10 because it's incredibly secular, even within the UK. I haven't looked at data recently, but it's always struck me as probably the more secular out of and most critical of Christianity, I'd say in particular. Yeah. I'm not sure if that sort of resonates with reality, but I know that in terms of the kind of secular journey that they're on. Quite Orwellian in their, at the moment in terms of things around hate speech and things like that. Does that translate into a sort of cultural hostility towards the gospel in your experience as well?
I think it was different when I was in high school and university, and now working, I guess, in a secular context. I think the hostility, well, high school was more like, the way high school is, it was more like a mockery. So I think that's what I found hardest. I was not only in a different culture, my accent sounded funny, people were asking me silly questions, but RE lessons, like I hinted at, was very much like, does anybody still believe this nonsense? For those people that do, like, the RE teacher was very anti-Christian in like a really, I don't know, that he felt so comfortable saying that in front of the class, and everybody would just laugh. So it was more that I don't think anybody like would say like bullied me or anything, but it was just like, oh, like, I mean, believe what you want, but gosh, you gotta be stupid to believe that. And I think when I went to university, and maybe this came with the territory of studying law, whenever there was any kind of moral issues, because you're having a conversation in such a, what does the law say about this? It's very difficult to like bring the gospel into that and be like, yes, but like Jesus, like, because you're just like, is this right or is this wrong? And, should the law do this? Should the law? I found that the hostility more came as that happened quite quickly. I think from first year to uni to like maybe third or fourth year, it was like, if you believed abortion, for example, was wrong in first year, people would be like, oh, okay, that's fair enough, we disagree. But by third year, like, you bigot. It was maybe more open to dialogue, but people were still like willing to tell you what they thought about what you believed. And I think when I left university, I found it more to be like a polite secularism, as in like, you do you, boo. Like, we just don't care. We don't care. You do what you want. And probably because people don't want to get fired. So people just leave you to it. And I think that's what I found hardest, because I'm like, somebody talk to me. I just want any conversation. Like, I almost missed some of that hostility because at least I had something there. So it becomes much harder to generate conversation on anything of meaning, because people are almost too scared to like, we need to, I respect your religion. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Like, I'm not actually that offended by people asking me hard questions, but people are scared to ask those hard questions. They don't want to be seen as intolerant. So I've just seen, I don't know whether that's just because of those contexts, school, university, and work, or if maybe a bit of both. The culture has shifted as well, in terms of how people relate. So that's been my own experience. And so now I'm trying to work out, okay, how do you talk about the gospel to people who don't want to talk about anything meaningful? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, because it sounds hard, doesn't it? Because it sort of blunts your inquisitiveness as well. Like, if you're always worried that if you ask someone a sort of probing question or a critical question, that and this is what I was saying, the more sort of Orwellian sort of kind of culture of being so concerned about offending someone or being perceived to have upset someone. Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? We probably don't want to get onto this just yet because we've missed some stuff you probably want to talk about. But it's I mean, how have you worked out how to discuss the gospel and have actually meaningful conversations in a culture where people are fearful of being inquisitive or offering perhaps what they really think? Because I think all that happens is people sort of self-censor, don't they? And actually they do have probably a lot of criticisms about Christianity or even the very notion of God. But you're in a culture like that, you're hesitant to share them and be honest because you're scared, you're worried, you're fearful of the ramifications of perhaps being perceived to have been offensive. So what have you kind of discovered along the way so far? I mean, and maybe what's helped you in that trajectory since high school and things?
Yeah, very much a work in progress still, but I think two main things. One is having meaningful conversations in general about anything. So I don't know if this is just a Scottish thing, but like, man, we could just talk about the weather all day. And the chat, what did you do at the weekend? Oh, that's nice. But just delving deeper into what people love and enjoy, whether that's like football or like museums, even if it's something I'm not interested in, loving people enough to care about the things that they care about, and then just probing just like, what do you think about that? I remember having a conversation about like Love Island. Like, never watched it, don't plan on watching it, like just not my vibe at all. I don't think it's helpful. That's another conversation. But everybody was watching it, and I was just like, just out of interest, like, why do you watch it? Why do you find it interesting? And people would give different answers. Some are just like, I just love television that I can switch off my brain. I like trash telly. That's I'm tired. I come back from work. I just want to switch off. And ended up having a conversation about body image and things like that. So that came off just me asking. I could have just been like, oh, Love Island, here we go again. Like, but just being interested enough in why people like the things that they do, what's their story, and then you become the person that people feel comfortable just expanding on things, because usually people say you're right, like even the way we say good morning or hello, it's this is going to be the end of the conversation. I'm going to say all right, you're going to say all right back, and that's the end of it. When people say how are you and you say, oh, not bad, that's like awkward, like okay you're supposed to say fine and then we move on. But just digging that, like sitting with the discomfort and just getting to know people a bit better, like what's wrong, so I think that's one way, finding a way of loving people enough to be genuinely interested in whatever they're interested in, even if you're not interested in, and digging deeper into those kinds of conversations. And I think the second way that I found helpful is being the one to bring up the hard questions myself. This seems counterproductive because like, oh, surely you want to like defend Christianity and like show that it's true and good. Like, absolutely. And I think in my early 20s, I maybe would have shied away from hard questions, like anything that I couldn't answer nice 1, 2, 3 neat tidy answer, because I'm that kind of person. I like logic, I like the facts, and I'm like, here's the answer to your question. So anything that didn't fit that, the suffering questions tend to fall into that category. It's like you're just not going to delve into that. And I remember people would ask, so I used to work in an African restaurant, and people would bring up like the genocide, for example, like people turned, like the Rwandan genocide, people turned on each other and killed each other in church. And I remember somebody saying that to me, like, explain that to me. How can you believe Christianity is true if Christians were willing to like kill each other? And I was just like, I think I might have given a trite answer of like, we're all sinners or something, just not engaging with that hard question. People would bring up colonialism, like you're only a Christian because of colonialism. And, there's half truths and sometimes in some of these things, but just like, no, I'm a Christian because it's true. And So, people would bring that, and I was just like, I can't answer this nice and neatly, so we'll just won't talk about it. But now, some of my non-Christian friends must think I'm crazy because I'm like I'm the one bringing up the conversations and being honest about wrestling with some of these questions. I would genuinely say, like, listen, the suffering question, these are my responses to them, but it's hard. This is what I find hard, and this is why. So I've just become a bit more open myself, and that's been very hard for me. Like the Zambian background I come from is very much like, persevere, like, if life is hard, just move on. So it's just been really hard for me to be open and be vulnerable about things that are hard. But I found that to be one of the most powerful, because then people are like, okay, she's willing to talk about it, so they feel comfortable bringing questions to you in that context, and that just takes time to build. It's not as you just talk to people in general, and having the YouTube channel maybe has given a platform for that, because I'll just talk about stuff, and and it makes it easier.
Out of interest, Phil, have you ever watched Love Island?
No, I haven't. I don't know if I should drop Tina in it.
But what you're saying,
Tina did a little bit for a bit.
I think I watched one episode. For experimental purposes,
of course. To be down with the kids and understand culture and critique it in some way, obviously.
just quickly, like, sorry, like over here, you're right, like the way you were saying how we greet people, and actually we don't really mean what we mean when we ask how are you. We just want you to say okay. We don't actually want anyone to expand or to unload their emotional toil on us. Is that like that's also in England as well? I think it's probably just a British thing in general. I imagine in Wales and Ireland it's probably the same as well. I've wondered, but so what do people do in Zambia? Like, I'm just out of interest. Like, would you be like, oh, how are you? And would people actually be interested or expand, or is it just? I always wondered, like, does everyone do this? Is it just we pretend to care, but actually we really don't?
I think it happens in every culture where people pretend to care and they don't. I think because in Zambia you have a lot more community. People might not necessarily, if you've got extended family. I remember growing up, I had like 2 aunties at home. Like, people would just pitch from the village and just stay for a whole month. Like, it's just, there's always kind of people around and people to help, and so, actually, you probably wouldn't share all your problems with strangers. There's this kind of, it's in the family and whatever. But because you've got those kind of extended family units, and even church and the way church community is so quite, tight knit. It becomes, and also you're in a culture where people might answer, I'm blessed and highly favored, when you ask how they are. So,
I'm going to start using that.
How are you? Oh, the Lord is good. Like, I know He is, but how are you? Like, so yeah, I think it's just a different set of problems. I'm not even saying like, oh, the Zambians are better, and we're like, I think it just looks different. How people respond to suffering. I think people are open to kind of sharing what they're going through, maybe in a Zambian culture, but there's something in how we're brought up. I think it's good and bad, in some sense. There's something in the way we're brought up that says you must, there's a Zambian phrase which just says "shipi kishafia," which just means like you just tough it out. So something that kind of says that, and just how we grow up. Like, I remember boarding school, like, there's so many unfair things that would happen. Like, you'd have somebody making noise in class, and there's like a noisemakers list, and if the prefect didn't find the culprit, you all got punished. You're raking the field on a Saturday, and nobody was like, oh, woe is me. It was just like, you just get on with it. So
just crack on.
just crack on. So yeah, you do have this sense of like, people are willing to kind of share like their burdens, but their response maybe when they do share is maybe people aren't like, oh man, I'm sorry for like stuff, but the Lord is good, and just tough it out. And I guess you also see people a lot worse a lot of the time, like, just the next neighborhood, like, and so it makes you think, oh, my problem doesn't matter as much. So I think every culture just has its own trite way of answering that question, and we need to be like, how can we be different in each culture as Christians, in counterculture, I guess.
What was that like in Papua New Guinea, Phil, then, where you sort of grew up as well? Is similar sort of thing, or?
Trying to work that out. I think where you knew people, you had that community, you would stop and you would like, you'd story with them. You just sit down and have a story, and tell it out. But I think there's also, as as Inonge said, just you'd have those times where it's just like afternoon, and you just kind of. But what you would do is you would say hello to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So you might not say how are you, but you would say like the greetings. So you'd have morning for morning, afternoon for afternoon, and good night or evening. It's very similar as Tok Pisin was the language, trade language that we speak, and the greetings were fairly similar. You could work them out pretty quickly, but you would say that to everyone. So when I came back to the UK, I would get really odd looks because I would be greeting everyone on the street. Like, hello. And the UK thing is you can only do that if you've got a dog. If you're walking a dog and someone else has a dog, then you can maybe make eye contact.
A great evangelistic opportunity, a pet dog. I don't even like dogs. I might get one just so I can talk to people.
Oh, it is open. We got to, so we didn't know many of our neighbours in one of the places we lived until we got the dog. And then as soon as we had the dog, we've got really good friends now, although we've moved out from that community. But it is a good way to, get people talking. And I hear similar with, well, you kind of experience it a bit when you have a very small child as well, unless they're annoying people, and then you get grumpy looks. But that's how it was in Papua New Guinea. But you get the same thing where you'd like, are you all right? And you might say fine, and you just kind of move on.
It changes in regions as well, because even in England, like in a middle class setting in the rural countryside, everyone says hello to everyone. But actually, if you're in a different setting, like on a working class, council estate somewhere, you don't greet everyone you don't know, because that could be, if you said it, if you stared at someone, that could be like a form of aggression or something as well. Like if you didn't know someone, like, you're right, they'd be like, what you want? You could imagine that could be that could be like, that could instigate some sort of conflict. Whereas in a different context, it would be fine. Like you said, you're walking a dog, you just say hello when you're in the woods. Yes, oh, morning. Morning. So it's just funny how we're all
learning those cultural cues is probably the trickiest things, I think, and that's probably where I experienced culture shock the most, is like just trying to figure out why did you just give me a dirty look? Like, what have I done? All I said was I thought I was being polite, but apparently I wasn't. I think it's really interesting what you're saying, Inonge, about bringing up the difficult being the one that's vulnerable to people is a really interesting. I've kind of noticed that with a few friendships that I've had, just sharing the struggles of life with them and just going like, this is really hard. And I kind of, as you say, I have this faith that kind of helps me navigate stuff, but it doesn't answer it. Like, I don't have a clear answer. And I think the older I get, the more I'm like, Christianity is about wrestling with it, just like everything else. There's just maybe something more hope-filled about that wrestle.
Which is a very Jewish view.
Yeah, apparently so.
It's a very Jewish view. I think as you mature, you almost become like, that's what the Jews do, view themselves like, as like Jacob wrestling with God throughout. That's just like such a Jewish view of God. So I think you're right. Yeah,
the rabbi friend I have is I'm learning from him. So I think that's really helpful. I don't know. I just find evangelism a little bit more effective in that way when I'm not as clear cut with answers. I think growing up in an evangelical culture, the whole thing with apologetics can be, here is the right answer.
Yeah.
And when you're like that, you're very hard to talk to, because when atheists are like that, they're very hard to talk to. So, how do you know that I'm wrong? Like, I think that's just a really, really valid point of working out, if you're going to have a strategy, maybe be less certain about your strategy, I guess. Yeah. So I'm interested, like, with you've avoided full-time ministry, and you've been very clear that like full-time ministry is not for you. So I'll be interested, like, how do you find those conversations in your work, or are these just conversations with secular friends? Are you not able to talk about faith at all in your work? Like, how are you balancing that sort of thing?
Yeah, I'm working from home at the moment, so not many. But when we were in the office, I actually found I was having loads of conversations. I think just the context I found myself in, and the colleagues I had were just a lot more willing. Sometimes I was like, "You guys serious?" I keep referring to this story. Like one of my friends from work. This is when lockdown was about to start. So we were all talking about, we're roughly the same age, like, millennial ish. And so we're talking about life insurance and like having a will. And do you have a will? Do you have a will? I don't have a will. Do you? And life insurance. And he just came out with like, how do you feel about death, Inonge? It's just like, what? And it's just I've just never been asked those kind of questions before. But so we all quite open actually about just talking about anything, politics, whatever it was. And because I started off being like a lot more open, like I'm a Christian, but also yeah, I'll just talk about some of the issues that I have problems with myself or wrestle with. So it was quite an open environment. Surprisingly, I just didn't know what to expect coming from like, Cornhill Bible training to like this context, but it was incredible in that way. So I can't complain by way of like opportunities and how my colleagues kind of treated me. They like heard me out. There was one or two that of course you have more conversations with. And I miss that actually. I miss those kind of chats, and having the YouTube channel helped with that sometimes, because sometimes they'll just watch my stuff. At the time, I wasn't even making anything particularly aimed at non-Christian. I was just chatting. I don't know, just random stuff like Christian worldview about this and the other. And well, I don't get watched your videos, and I'll be like, oh gosh, which one did you watch? And it would be like, oh, the one on like reading the Bible, spiritual warfare, like nothing like remotely like, oh really? Is that the one you're gonna pick? Like, come on. I was aiming that at like Nigerian Christians, but anyway. So yeah, so it was interesting the kind of things that one of my friends in particular was interested in was like the theology doctrine type videos. I'm like talking about prayer and the sovereignty of God, and like, the ones that were aimed maybe at them, like, finding satisfaction, like not interested, just like I want to know this hard topic. So that was an interest. I was like, interesting. Like, you wanna talk about big theology stuff. You don't want the stereotypical apologetic content. You're like, meh. I'm not asking that question. So it's been great actually, and that was one of the main reasons I said to you earlier, Phil, like full-time ministry. I just knew it wasn't for me, and part of that was when I was doing full-time ministry type things, I just missed hanging out with non-Christians. Not because I hate Christians, because I get sick of them, but there was only so much I could handle of like Christian things all the time, and I just missed those kind of conversations. And I was like, I think God's made me that way. I think He's given me a heart and a passion for people that are not Christians, in a way that I have to like be among them, like living life day to day, rather than just training other people to do that. And so that was a big clue, just how I was feeling. Like I love studying the Bible, I love teaching the Bible, I loved those one-to-ones. You just open the Bible together, like really enjoyed it, and I still do, but I couldn't do that. Like I could handle that like maybe 2 days max. I couldn't do that all the time. So that kind of was what I was like. I think finding a way of just going back to something secular maybe, and still finding a way of using my gifts in some way, because I've had all this training, and it really privileged to have all of it in everything, like evangelism, apologetics, theology. And I felt the sense of like, I need to use this, I need to steward this and use this somehow to serve the church. And so that's kind of what I'm working out, like what it looks like to do that, and how to do that with a full-time job, because you can't just
but there's something quite authentic about that. Paul, tent maker, about working, being around the people of God, but also being around people who are not, and like you said, the opportunities you have, you just wouldn't be open to you if you were, like you said, in full-time ministry. Like you, I wouldn't want to work with Christians all the time. I think, yeah, I couldn't do that. I'm with you. It's not for me. I mean, there's something nice, isn't there? There's something really powerful about being around and in community with people who believe the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also quite exciting and to be around people who don't, who just think you're nuts and wrong, or both, or and more, and
the whole kind of bubble that forms when you're just around Christians, it becomes very insular. You find disagreements within that bubble, but sometimes that can be an unhealthy kind of living. And that's I've got to be a bit careful, because where I grew up for school was very much a Christian bubble, mission school, and very evangelical, quite American majority evangelical, and it took me a little bit of time to unpick that. When I arrived back in the UK, it did make me ready to be in the UK, I admit, and kind of like what you were saying, just like you get a full-time ministry is not for me. That's kind of how I felt about a full-time in Christian bubble zone. Like, kind of made me concerned about heaven. Like, I've got to live with these people.
I can't do it for eternity. Maybe a couple of years.
Well, that's something to work through. But
Christians all the time. Oh man.
How's that? Yeah. So I think there's a healthy aspect to this time, this life before heaven. There is a need to have challenge, and actually it's interesting hearing a story, because there's a bit of an inverted. I found my friends at university were totally apathetic to my faith. It was like, oh, you're a Christian, let's go have a beer. So, okay, and I hadn't worked out how to what you were suggesting, like in the being vulnerable and bringing up things. So it was very, very much not having that challenge. But now working, I'm actually full-time ministry with Friends International. There's this that I do find there's more, maybe because I'm a bit older and a little bit less insecure in my faith, I guess. There is a little bit more back and forth with people, and being able to ask those questions of how do you actually feel about this topic, and a bit more life experience to fall back on when it comes to difficult things like suffering. And I found it very hard when people brought that up when I was at uni, because I was quite in a privileged position to be at university, and I hadn't really experienced that much suffering or anything growing up in Papua New Guinea. But now that there's personal experience of that, and I can just go, look, this is where I'm at. I don't have an answer for it, but that's it. I still have my faith and this hope that there's a reason for it, and something better that God has in store. And I can see how He's bringing about His purposes even through suffering. And so it's just working out those things and how I can be vulnerable. I'm kind of rambling, Dan. Where are we going?
Oh no, I was going to say it's interesting, because as you were talking, I was thinking there are going back to what I said about how certain contexts can blunt your inquisitiveness. It was interesting listening to you. I think if you're in your particular context, the downside to being around people who all believe the same things is that you're less inclined to ask inquisitive, critical questions, because you don't want to be, Doubting Thomas amongst the rest of the apostles. You don't want to, you want to be seen to be questioning things, or just rather than just sort of towing the line. But there's the inverse of that. I found, as maybe Inonge you would agree, is that when you're around people who don't believe what you believe, in a way that can also blunt your inquisitiveness in a sense, because it sounds like you've overcome that now. In the sense, you're much more likely to, like if someone asks you a question, you're almost trained in a way to try and give this pet answer, you know, oh, suffering. Well, there's natural suffering, and there's free will, and you can go into this, and having Alvin Plantinga and the free will defense, blah blah blah, you know, all that jazz. And rather than, I think most of us are uncomfortable with actually honest about, actually we haven't really got it sewn up, and actually, I actually struggle with this. This is being open. I think there's a sense in which that can blunt your inquisitiveness as well, and you're wanting to be more honest with people who don't believe what you believe, because you're often worried about putting them off. You know, oh well, if I'm too honest, I'll put them off, and they won't want to explore the gospel. Actually, I think there's something quite refreshing about someone who does deeply believe but still has questions, and wrestles with with those big questions, and you haven't got everything neatly boxed and tidied up. But it sounds like from what you were saying, you're much more comfortable now with being honest around people who don't believe what you believe. And I think, do you think that that's appreciated, do you think, much more by the people that you're working with and interacting with?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's been a learning experience, and maybe just conviction about this over the years. I would maybe describe, I wouldn't have thought I was arrogant or anything, but I was just so self-assured in a way that communicated that I had everything sorted. And then people would listen to my story. I would talk about like my life, and like, oh, I lost my dad at a young age, and then my grandmother, like quite a lot of suffering in my life. And people just didn't know about it. I just never talked about it. And people, that would almost resonate. They're like, oh wow, like, and I was like, oh, okay, this is something that people resonate with, because then I'm not this perfect Inonge with all the right answers and all the right theology. And so it was through interactions with people actually where they kind of hinted like, by the way, we see you as this person that is sorted. And I was like, oh my goodness, is that what I'm projecting? Like, I'm far from sorted. And just, I think like studying the Bible and looking at how the Bible wrestles with questions and suffering. I think studying the book of Job, I can't remember when this was, maybe it was when I was doing relay with UCCF or just before that, and just seeing the honesty that the Bible writers and God's people wrestle with things. And so actually, if I've got a high view of God and how he works in the world, and a high view of the gospel, like nothing is going to diminish it, then I don't think, I think having that integrity of not pretending like things are okay, or not hiding the hard questions, trusting that God is able to work. I'm not going to diminish the gospel somehow by being truthful and honest about something. I think sometimes there's wisdom in who you're sharing that with. Like I maybe wouldn't go, if somebody's having doubts about their faith, I wouldn't be like, well, guess what, like, here's my 10 other doubts, and that maybe wouldn't be helpful. There's a wisdom there, certainly, but I think every now and again, just good to remind people that you're a real person, and it helps them see they could be a Christian too. They don't have to like first sort themselves out. Like, the gospel is for them too. The messed up, the unsorted, the got doubts and many questions, and you don't have to like have all the answers intellectually and then become a Christian. It's like you can still become a Christian with questions, and so it's removing barriers actually for people to be like, okay, I still haven't quite reckoned science and this or this, but I think this is true. The death and resurrection of Jesus, and I believe that we can start from there. So yeah, I think, yeah, God has been at work for sure in that. But
it's interesting that temptation for Christians to neatly package things up and put a kind of gloss on things, because I think I became a Christian in a sort of Pentecostal tradition, and there was very much this sense in which you have to appear that things are together and that problems don't exist. I remember when I first became a Christian, I went back to college, and people always, I was in class with a lot of it was mature, a lot of women probably in their 30s, 40s and stuff, and they're talking about how they were very stressed, and I was like, no, I got the gospel in Jesus. I don't have stress. Like, Christian, I just don't have stress. They're like, wait till you get old and you got kids in the house. I was like, no, like praise God. Like, I don't God doesn't allow me to be stressed.
You're blessed to be stressed.
Yeah, too blessed to be stressed. Yeah, and like, so you pick up all these sort of aphorisms, these sort of false aphorisms, in a sense, from that tradition, and it so it does almost train you to sort of to neglect, to deny reality, in a sense, to deny that you don't feel good, or that you are stressed and things, with these kinds of sayings and things like that. And I think I brought that into a lot of my early interactions with people, is coming across, oh well, you got this issue, okay, well, here, what about A, B, C, D, and E? See, done. Yeah, and then what about this question? Well, there's E, F, G, H, and I. Yeah. And you just need to read this book, and don't need to worry about the Bible. Just read, his this person. Read about the Bible. Yeah. We can come back to that. But would you be interested? Like, would you be open to talking a little bit more about Zambia? Would that be, what is the? Because I'll be honest, I for my undergraduate degree, I did some sort of stuff looking at the history of empires and colonialism and things, but I didn't really do much on Zambia, and I'd be really interested to know a bit of the background about Christianity in Zambia. Obviously, Africa has a rich history, far more than Europe, in terms of Christianity and even its impact on the world today. So I'd be really interested to know a little bit more about Christianity in Zambia, and maybe, if you're happy, talk a little bit about the kind of remnants of colonialism and things. I think it's quite a pertinent topic at the moment, and a lot of people reassessing and looking at back at the past with a slightly more critical lens. Would that be okay?
Yeah. I'm actually thinking about this. I'm very much still working this out and reading. The British High Commissioner to Zambia put a Twitter post. Man, it was hilarious. Okay, maybe not to him, but he wrote something along the lines of, he was outside. One of the missionary explorers, one of the missionaries to Zambia, David Livingstone. He's got a whole city in Zambia named after him, Livingstone, and the Great Victoria Falls. Originally called Mosi Otunya, which in the original language means the smoke that thunders, which, if you see photos or videos of the Victoria Falls, it makes sense.
That's a much better name, by the way.
That's a great name.
It is Mosi Otunya. Like, it's so like, whoo. So he was like, I'm gonna rename you after my queen. So Victoria Falls. So anyway, the British High Commissioner was posing next to I don't know, some kind of David Livingstone memorial, and it had something along the lines of, I don't know if this is something that David Livingstone prayed, like, I pray on this great nation that it would, prosper in the preaching of your word, or something that you and I might say, oh, that's a good prayer to pray. But I think his question was like, what does David Livingstone's legacy mean to you? And because Zambia 1991 was declared a Christian nation constitutionally, we're a Christian nation, we don't do that, we're a Christian nation. So I think what he thought would happen would, people would be like, oh great, he brought the gospel, whatever. Man, people took him to the cleaners. I went through, like, I know it's a bit sad, I went through the quote tweets and then the comments, just to find anybody that said anything nice. There's maybe one person, but most of them were like, he brought nothing, he made nothing, colonialism, religious nonsense. Like, it was just like absolutely brutal. And I was just like, wow, like, people are not having this anymore. So it is quite a hard for me. I'm like, I need to work that out, because when I grew up studying, so I did have my high school in Zambia, so I did some history, and the history, the way we learned history was interesting. So the African history was very much, the way it was phrased was kind of savage. Like, you had your kingdoms and where they originated from, and which tribes came from which kingdoms, and you had the origin, expansion, and decline. And the origin would be like, they took over this kingdom, and then they expanded by selling each other and trading each other and killing each other. And then decline would be like, and then the king died, and that. And then whenever you learned, and then you would be like, fast forward to David Livingstone and people, and it would be like, the questions in the history paper would be like, what did Dr. David Livingstone, what did Henry Morton Stanley say to Dr. David Livingstone when they met, like another explorer, Dr. David Livingstone, I presume, like that. It was just like, oh, African history, savagery, like David Livingstone, what did they say when they met? It was all very, at the time, I was just memorizing. I was trying to pass the exam. So it's just like, we'll memorize the essays. I don't know who wrote it, but it obviously came very much from a Western lens. So on one end, you kind of have this kind of colonialism that brought in a lot of the remnants that you see today. Like, I talk a lot about how I used to be embarrassed about my culture growing up, because anything that was white was good and anything that was African seemed bad. So traditional African clothing, would have days in school to celebrate, like Independence Day or African Freedom Day, and none of us wanted to wear it. Like, it was just like, oh no, like that's like the village people wear that. Like, we don't do that. So any civilization and education was associated with the West and English. We used to get punished at school for speaking Zambian local languages, like speak English. And I've just been thinking about, looking back, and like, so many things messed up. And so, yeah, but then you have this kind of Christianity existed in Africa way before the colonialists, colonizers, sound like Black Panther, way before. Didn't mean to go Wakanda there, but yeah, where before colonialism arrived. Like, and I've been reading a really helpful book just detailing like the history of Christianity in Africa and different African theologians. So there is that. The reason we don't know about that, ironically, is because of colonialism, because we just never learned things from the perspective other than anything from a Western lens. So but you do kind of, I was chatting to my mom about this, and you had these kind of revivals in Zambia, and the reason Zambia is a constitutionally Christian nation is because there's a point at which, and this happens a lot, where there's like a revival, and then people put laws that are like Christian, because everybody is just fire Jesus everywhere. So you have that in one sense. It's like, okay, the gospel is good, but like colonialism isn't, and you shouldn't try and, just because maybe the gospel came in a different wave, doesn't mean that you kind of justify the other thing. Like, the means that it came through doesn't justify that. Like, it doesn't become good just because something good may potentially have come out of it, because other bad stuff came from it as well. So yeah, I don't even know where I'm going with this, but
no,
it's really helpful. There's some stuff that I've been working through with some friends from Papua New Guinea that sounds very similar. So in the school I was in, so for the first part, like primary school, I was in an international school in one of the main cities called Mount Hagen. And when you were just saying that they're punished for speaking local languages, it was similar there. Like, if you spoke Pidgin English or the trade language, you'd be told off. It's about English. That's our national language now. It's like, oh, was it? Is it? Like, how's that worked out? And then a few of the Papua New Guinean friends I have from the mission school, unpicking like there was American evangelicalism, because that was the majority, with what Christian faith is, and how some of the dangers of a Christian nation, of a Christian bubble, of a Christian administration, which was basically our mission school. Our mission school basically had its own little law system that was allowed because they had money and were in Papua New Guinea. Without going into too much detail, but there was basically an administration, and that became very law-based, behavior-based, and not very grace-filled. And so you have these teenagers growing up like everything was Christian. Our assemblies were Christian. We'd all go to the same service on a Sunday. We'd all have the same youth group in the Sunday afternoon. We saw each other 24/7 pretty much, and it was all Christian. But it's all about how you behave, not about how, Jesus, although that was said, it was still very judgmental. And the naughty kids, the ones who doubted, were generally judged a little bit harder because they generally behaved a little bit naughtier and watched a naughtier movie or whatever. And I guess that's the danger of bubbles. You don't have the opportunity to show grace. You just become more judgmental about who's more Christian than the other person. So there's just a lot of resonation in there, just trying to unpick what you say, the good news of the gospel, that is freedom, that is life, that is a light in a dark place. It brings hope, but also redeems cultures rather than assimilates cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's trying to work that through when a large block of my life has seen how it assimilates and the dangers of that.
I mean, that's always been a thread through Christianity, that struggle about what do you do with culture? It's like the Judaizers, trying to, what do we do with these former pagans and Romans and Greeks? What do we do with them? Do we just need to make them Jewish? So it's been this common thread throughout the history of Christianity is how do we, what do we reject, what do we redeem, and I can't remember now. Is it three? I always think of 3 R's: reject, redeem, and I can't remember. I don't know what the other R is. It's probably quite important. What do you do in the culture? But it's one of those. I don't know. Sounds good. One of the. It will come to me later. I'll wake up at like 3 in the morning thinking.
That's the one I want. Later on.
Yeah, so it's difficult, isn't it? Because I always it's quite sad in a way, because looking at the history of Christianity in Africa, and then people, I think, in their hearts thinking they're doing good, trying to turn everyone in Africa into a suit-wearing Victorian Baptist or Anglican, it's because we've lost what's you lose what's distinct about African Christianity. I mean, a lot of thankfully there's a lot that's still very distinct about African Christianity, but there's still that remnant of Victorian suit wearers. I have a thing with people wearing suits. I'm not a big fan of suit wearing Christians. No offense to anyone listening who wears a suit to church, but I know it's complex. But it's interesting. You look around the world. You look at South Korea. Look at Christianity in South Korea. Look at, like you said, Zambia, Nigeria, Ghana. Then you go down to South America as well and look at Brazilian Christianity and Argentina. There's there's good and bad, and I think people have a tendency to, if you're a Christian, to focus on the good, and if you're in a critical position, is focus on the bad. Whereas I think it is, like with most things, it's far more nuanced than that. We do, there is bad, there is good, and here we are. Here we are today. There was bad before, there was good before, and some of those good things were exchanged for bad things, and some of those bad things were exchanged for good things.
How are you finding that in your own faith, Inonge? I imagine there's been a bit of a journey through that. How have you processed that? Are you still processing it?
Still processing. I think interesting enough, it was those conversations that I mentioned earlier with people from different African countries asking those hard questions about genocide and colonialism and all these things. And then I was doing some when I was doing relay, we were learning some of the theology covered, like the Trinity, and like Mike Reeves is really helpful on that, because he talks about delighting in the Trinity, like the Trinity not being like a bad math problem, but actually something that is good. And I think just another book was Apologetics, just thinking about culture and thinking about diversity and thinking about how those things worked with who God is and how God made things to be and how things are going to be in the end in Revelation. So it was actually like reflecting on the Christian worldview that helped me go back and revisit, hold on a second, why am I embarrassed about African traditional clothing? Why am I embarrassed about cultural things? And also I found people interested in my culture, and it was an into like talking about other stuff, because people would be like, oh, Zambia, tell me more, like, and people were interested. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, like I remember inviting my hockey teammates to, I didn't think they'll turn up, so I'm going to invite them for a meal, but they're not going to pitch. And so I made it Zambian themed. I just played this card. I made it Zambian themed because I was like, now they can't say no, they have to come. So a lot of things were happening in the background that just made me rethink that. And actually, it's because I have thought about that kind of Christian identity, that I'm like, this is not inconsistent, and just trying to make those gospel connections and threads, such that now I'm celebrating the good, critiquing some of that which isn't good. I know there's a wave of like Pan-Africanism, which is like, well, we must look at everything through like an African lens. But like I still need to look at things with a Christian worldview lens because I'm a Christian. But I need to then revisit some of the things that I was told growing up in a Reformed Baptist church. You've got the regulative principle of worship, and so like any drums, whoa, like we then in just rethinking some of those things, and some of it's funny you mentioned American Christianity. It just infiltrates everything. I'll be watching things, and some of the things that we used to practice in the church, and I'm like, it just doesn't work in a Zambian context. Like anytime I listen to blogs, especially blogs to women, and they talk about homeschooling, and they're like, this is the right way to do it, and I'm like, okay, but like you're living in a country with like higher literacy rates, and with like socioeconomic advantages. You've got a library, you've got books, so you're gonna tell a woman in an African village who can't read that like she's somehow less Christian, and it's a lesser option if she's not homeschooling her children who don't have access to life, like just stuff like that. I just would start to pick up on things, I think, from living in Scotland, and then like observing, so working out what are the kind of timeless gospel truths, what are the important things, and what are the cultural applications of some of those, and what are the blind spots that we might experience, that we might have when we're doing that. So that's what I'm constantly doing, and I'm like, is this just my Scottishness or with my Zambianness? Like not even like one culture overriding the other. Like there are some things that you do in Zambian churches or Zambian culture that I don't know about that. Like, where does that theology come from? That's not in the Bible. And so it just makes me more like I'm on my toes about, I don't want to inflict in the same way that has been inflicted on me subtly through teaching. I don't want to inflict that on other people. Even the idea of soundness, like my friend challenged me recently, like, growing up in Reformed culture, you subconsciously think Black preachers are somehow less sound because they sound somehow less expository, because they're maybe more expressive. And I was like, I knew I subconsciously did that. Like, if you sent me a Black preacher, of course some of them, there's some dodgy ones there, but like I would just almost see that, and subconsciously I'm like, they must not be sound because they're not John Piper or whoever. And so that there's a lot that I've had to kind of unlearn because of my church background, which was very much, I would say, Western influenced. Like, we used to sing hymns a cappella. We're more conservative than my conservative church in Scotland. That's saying a lot. So I just like, what is the Bible say? What's clear? And what is kind of, hold loosely. And I think it's a helpful principle to take, because then you're constantly reflecting and working that out, and leaving room for people to do things a bit differently. Even if you think, I think like some of these missionaries pitched, and they're like drums, and they're like, this is too strange. And anything that was too strange, they're like, better not do that, not biblical. So, how do I not do that in other ways, in other contexts? And just repeat the same mistakes just in a different way. So I'm just cautious about, hold on to the main truths of the gospel and proclaim those boldly. But areas, sure, I have convictions, but where they're secondary, or whether I think this is cultural, I would say so, or like hold on to it loosely. And I think that's a helpful way of kind of still navigating that.
Yeah.
I've remembered the third R.
He's done it.
It's receive, reject, redeem.
Nice.
There we go.
That's helpful. I think that process is really helpful. Being, I don't know, for whatever reason, I was quite critical of the bubble that I was in, and I think part of that was my parents worked with an external mission organization. So when I went to the mission school, I was boarding and still technically an outsider. And then I go back to where my parents were during holidays. And so I was very much, and probably still am, as critical of, like, just able to pinpoint where we're not living in a way that should align with what we preach. And I've got into all sorts of debates on the internal email system, email forums as it was at the time with our slow dial-up internet. just finding it so frustrating with things like just people not aware of their culture that they bring, where there would be things like Christians who are about to go back home, call it going finish, as I don't know what other way that would say you'd leave permanently. And instead of selling things in the local currency in Kenya and allowing anyone to purchase these things that they had, they would sell them in US dollars. And so Papua New Guineans who are on the mission center wouldn't be able to access these things. They wouldn't sell them at discount. Like, they wouldn't just be like giving them away. And you're like, what's the purpose? What's been the whole purpose of you being here? Just to hold this stuff. You can't take it back, but you want to earn money from the people around you. And it was things like that where you're just like, surely like gospel living is like, okay, it's a bit sacrificial. Here's some stuff that you would never have access to in Papua New Guinea. I've got access because these people paid me loads of money in the States to be over here.
Yeah.
Here's the stuff if it's useful. And it was things like that that just, I was very ready to leave that bubble. But it's still kind of in there, just mulling things over of like, as you say, in the churches that we're in now, how are we blind to the culture that we're in? And how we become aware of those blind spots is having, people like yourself, just having a diverse church and listening to those people who have the experience of a different culture, and allowing us to explore, well, how does the gospel help us to live this out? And I find that kind of critique generally is received defensively. So when I made that critique, I was like, what are we doing here? Like, why are things being sold in US dollars in Papua New Guinea? The challenge was, well, I actually had someone, what have Papua New Guineans done for us? That was a missionary response to the criticism. And I'm going, oh my goodness, wow. Why are you even in this country? Like, I don't understand. I can't empathize with a response like that. And so trying to help people see their blind spots without them doubling down and going, this isn't my culture, this is Christianity, it's really hard to bring that graciously. So just kind of on that, when you're discussing these kind of blind spots in your interactions with them, have you had any experience of, a good experience within the church of people kind of recognizing those points where actually this is Scottish culture or Western culture, and maybe we can learn from that, or have you experienced the sort of negative side of that as well?
Yeah, I think surprisingly, that sounds sad, because I think I just generally expect resistance whenever I'm challenging anything that the church is saying, but like it's been relatively like positive whenever I've kind of talked about this. I remember having a conversation with one of the elders in my church about it, and he was like, "Yep," like I was like, "Oh, okay." I expected to like do a bit more convincing than that. So I think it depends how you tackle it. I think giving examples and I think it helps in my case, because I'm like I like living in two different cultures helps to, I'll say, for example, when you do this thing, this is how it comes across this way and here, and just laying it, almost like dumbing it down a little bit, because you're just being like explicit in what you mean. I think it's become maybe popular to just use phrases and euphemisms and talk in general terms. I like to be, where I can, call out what exactly I'm referring to, give one or two examples of what I'm referring to, and so that's one way of doing it. I think if churches, I don't want to become like the poster girl for like diversity and whatever, and I would just say, and you've hinted at it there, Phil, having partnerships or relationships in some way with churches that are different from you, so both at a level, a local level, like citywide, because that will kind of maybe bring out some of those socioeconomic blind spots, but then a national level, but also in an international level. It's just really hard if you've got somebody in a church in China or somewhere talking about the issues that they're going through and some of the challenges, to then if you're exposed to different areas, and you're partnering and you're praying for them, it becomes hard to be like, well, they're just not doing things right when you hear different aspects. So, just to give you an example, like in the Zambian context, maybe the challenge the Zambian church faces is cultural Christianity. Like, the thief is stealing and saying, praise God for my meal. Like, how do you even, I don't know how you deal with that. Like, because I haven't lived in Zambia in a long time, but, if you're hearing like people talking about the challenges, then as a Christian in Scotland who sometimes moans about like, oh, we're in a secular country, I'm like, do you know what? This is what it's like in Scotland. Actually, you've got less lukewarm Christians because it just really does not pay to be a Christian. You've got Zambian culture where like, it looks good, like your bride price goes up, like, I've got a master's degree and I'm a Christian, double that price, Here it's like, gosh, you weirdo, like extra level of weird. So, it just brings perspective, like having those relationships. So not being kind of insular, whether that's, just you, your church or your denomination, but like, of course, sometimes it's difficult to partner with people with different beliefs, but in some way, like pray for them, like, the Iranian church down the road, or, the African church, or, the Korean church, whatever it is. And then nationally as well, look beyond Scotland, because there's a church beyond that, and then international, not just like this one country, different countries, and praying and letting the whole church be aware of that, not just that one day on Mission Sunday, like we pray for this random country that nobody cares about, and giving them a 10-minute slot. Like intentionally doing that, I think helps as a global church, to have a bit more perspective about what we're going through, and maybe highlight some of our own blind spots. So yeah,
it's really helpful. There's a couple of ways I wanted to take this, because you've got a law degree. There's quite a lot on your heart about sort of advocacy and welfare, and I will come round to that, I think, in a minute. But there's a couple of questions in live chat which I think, as I said in the title, we'll talk about women in evangelism, because that's another passion of yours. And I've got a couple friends kind of looking at this at the moment, women in evangelism, trying to figure out where can they go? Where is a place that a woman who wants to be an evangelist can step up in a role? And I think that question alone is sort of damning where we're at. Yeah. So there's a couple of questions here, but before we go into those questions, I'd be just interested in your experience. You are a woman evangelist in what you do on Overflow Chat, and sharing that. What's been your experience in the church in Scotland, and then has your ministry as an evangelist had to go outside the church because you weren't able to be evangelist within it, or is that just the way it's worked out? What's been your experience there?
Yeah, I've had an interesting journey. So in the church I'm in is like a independent evangelical complementarian church. I've always kind of been in I think I was in one egalitarian church. That was not great. But before that, I was in a really legalistic church that there was an American pastor, and just had a certain vibe to it. So I remember being involved in Christian Union missions, and saying to somebody like, oh, I'm the CU president now, can you pray for me? And they're like, should you be president as a woman? And so there was a certain kind of there's another debate, complementarianism that said like women shouldn't lead anything, period. Whether in the church, whether para church, like it didn't matter. So, and I had a passion, like burning passion for youth ministry, just from personally my own struggles as a youth. I was like, I just want to be able to equip young people to know what they believe and understand what they believe and articulate that and be confident in it. So there was just nowhere for me to go with that. So I guess a lot of my ministry has kind of happened in para church settings. So UCCF, I went to every conference there was under the sun, and received training, quite a lot of training in that context. I left that church eventually, more because of, not even because of that, although I was like, okay, great, so I can't do the ministry I want to do. but through Pirate Church, I was able to lead youth camps, a sports camp that I led, Christians in Sport. They gave me opportunities. There wasn't even like, oh, you're a woman thing. It just didn't matter. So I was able to kind of nurture the gifts a little bit and be like, oh, okay, I think this is something I enjoy, and develop my gifts. But when I left that church, I went to the church that I'm in now. I think I've actually had relative to I listen to many women who just my story is the opposite. So maybe I'm not the best person to. I've had incredible opportunities and a lot of support. And I think this is where church leaders can play a role. I could probably list you like a timeline of like men, like I know women, we can encourage each other, but it's the men with the power in one sense that like need to make that happen and do a lot of encouraging. So right from the word go, like starting from relay, I'm going to do relay 10-month discipleship training, have to fund it myself. I was like, man, I'm just not about that broke life. Like, I just wasn't keen to do it because I was worried about finances. And also, my career, I was like, oh, I want to do other stuff. 2 elders in my church being like, do it, we'll support you. Like just really like active, very active encouragement, not just passive. Like it had to be, otherwise I needed, even as somebody who comes across probably to many people as confident, like I needed that extra encouragement, and they gave it. I finished relay and I was like, I might do Cornhill, I don't know, I'm still broke. And they were like, we'll support you, we'll pay for it. What do you need? Like, tell us, what do you need? And through Cornhill, I remember the staff team leader for UCCF in Scotland, and that man nagged me until I signed up for Cornhill. I was like, you need to use your gifts. Like, I wasn't like, nah, I don't want to do ministry. Like, this is not important. So like he really, really encouraged. Like at one point, he just sent me the application form for Cornhill. Like nothing in the text message, just the link to the application. Like please do this. Any job that came up, ministry related, youth, whatever. Like I would just receive messages from Peter Dixon, like youth worker job, and I was just like, okay, I don't want to do ministry, Pete. Like, but then he was like, okay, if you don't want to do it, at least train. And do this, like even if you don't end up in full-time ministry. So and then just the elders in my church just supporting that, and even when I was doing Cornhill, I can remember 2 male friends just being like, Inonge, I think you're really gifted, like can you think about how you can use this gift, like just like going out the way, like you don't have to say this to me, but you're saying it, you're being specific about what you mean. And I'm like, okay, so I'm not just imagining this, like, okay, enough people have said it, now maybe I might act on it and like be more intentional and thinking about that. So that's been kind of my experience. And even now, I mean, I'm speaking at a few things I've spoken at is because one of my elders has literally just been dishing out my email to people. Sometimes I'm like, oh, but he's just like, go for it. Like he's sending my YouTube, like, why are you sending my YouTube videos? Like, because when I'm making those videos, I'm here in my room. I'm not imagining like a church leader watching them. I know I'm targeting some of them are church leaders, but I'm like, they're not watching. He's busy sending them to church leaders. Like, oh, by the way, we use this in our, team day thing, whatever. And I'm just like, oh my goodness. Like it's just a part of me, mortified, like, oh my goodness, like I'm not that legit. But it is that kind of, we've invested in you, and we'll give you the opportunities to speak. And how can we, and I've come up with different ideas. Like I would like to equip women in the church. Maybe let's do something per term. If I brought something to the elders like that, they'll be like, sure, when are we doing it? Like, so it's just been, I think my experience has been very unique in that way, because I speak to other women and it's just not quite like that. And I feel like it should be like that. But they have been men, and I'm speaking in a complementarian setting here, who have been intentional about A, telling me, I think you're gifted in this area, B, giving me opportunities to train, and offering support, not just like, by the way, you should train, like, do you need money? Like, we'll pay for that. And then thirdly, then giving opportunities and platforms to use those gifts on an ongoing basis, and offering encouragement. Like, I'm speaking at Keswick in a few weeks, and 2 of the elders were just like, oh, Inonge, by the way, I saw that green, how can we pray for you? I'm just like, I'm just Inonge, like, why do you care that, so it's just incredible. And if somebody is asking, a church leader, or whatever, how can we encourage women in ministry? Man, it takes that level, I think, of intentionality, because women will just, they don't have the opportunities, and sometimes they'll shy away from, you know, putting themselves forward. And so you almost need to be like extra in your encouragement and support, and practically offer it as well. Don't just say it like, by the way, I think you're a good evangelist. Okay, like, is something coming up? Like, tell somebody, like, oh, by the way, I've got this somebody in my church and they would be good for this. And that's where that I think that's where it matters in yeah.
That's really encouraging to hear. I mean, we're both in complementarian churches in that sense. Sorry, Dan, I put you in it. But as I am part of the leadership team, trying to do that and encourage the women around me that I see as gifted in evangelism and ministry, trying to work out where those platforms are, is really interesting. Hearing the leaders you've been involved with doing that really well. I mean, complementarianism gets a lot of bad press, and rightly so, because of that extreme. And there is that extreme, and as a church, we have women in our church preach, and that would be seen as very liberal by some. And you're like, what, really? Like, I don't see that happening in the Bible. Like Phoebe or Priscilla, I can never remember who brings Romans. Like, would she be told to sit down? Or Junior's part of that.
Don't even.
And then you got regendering Junior. Like, there's like all sorts of mess in that, and so I that kind of leads into the question that Rebecca has asked. Like, do you have any sort of, have you had that kind of response to you, where it's been like, why do you have this platform? Or I'll just be interested to what you have to say to those who oppose women in ministry. I would have quite a bit to say, but I'd just be interested in what your voice is.
Yeah. I think it has maybe not happened as much recently. I don't know. I just inhabit different. I think because I'm not in ministry, I think people that it would be interesting to see somebody in ministry, women in ministry, answering that question, because I think their experience is quite different, because they're in these spaces a lot more with men, and you know, like the men I interact with are like my elders, and they're like my pals. Like, if you look at the elders, they're really chill. Like, people are like, is that your elder? Really? It's like, he's chill, he's vibing. So, you know, but if I was maybe in full-time ministry and I was going to a conference and I was surrounded, but like, I don't know what that experience would be. So I think they would maybe have a lot more insight into, the side eye people give you. Do you even belong here? But because because I'm not in ministry, I don't really inhabit those. I mean, I went to a pastors conference in 2 years ago. Like, it's not just pastors, but people in ministry. And yeah, like, I wasn't even in ministry. People are like, so what do you do? And I'm like, I work for Macmillan. Like, they're like, why are you here? But even then, I just stayed with my, people that I knew and things like that. So, what I would say maybe to people in the past that would, were not willing to kind of give me the opportunities. I think the gifts of the gifts of the Spirit, including the teaching gifts, are given to men and women. Now, when I say I hold to a complementarian view, like, there's a kind of complementarianism that is like, you could call it Christian patriarchy, where they see men as ontological leaders and women as ontologically submissive. And so it's the kind of space where, when they get to the passage about, wives submit to husbands, are like, what should we say to the single people? And the answer is nothing. Like, they're submitting to nobody. But they'll come to the conclusion, well, submit to all men. Like, if you're in a meeting, if you're on a church team, then, should have a posture, let the men lead, because, you're starting from a wrong place. Like, it's something that's ontological, but actually, if you see it as something that's like purely functional, I'm not even convinced. Maybe I need to do more thinking on this. Like, it doesn't even elaborate on. It's just, it's not like, women or wives submit to husbands or whatever, because men are better leaders or whatever. Like, all those things that are kind of said, I'm like scripture is silent on that. You're just saying stuff now. So I think we need to throw some of those, I would say, cultural baggage away, and actually go back to what does it actually just say, and what does it not say. And I think there's there's a way in which there's qualifications for elders. I believe that those are a male, but then there are different ways in which women can serve in leadership without conflicting with that. So I think asking the question, where is your heart in this? Because the way some of this dialogue goes, you're convinced some people are just convinced they just want to cling to power. It's all about just always having conversations about women can or can't do. But if you have a heart of like, how are we going to serve the Lord better? How can we preach the gospel better, men and women? I think that having that different kind of disposition frames a conversation in a different way, because then you're not obsessed about where's the line, what can we get away with or not get away with it. Like you're thinking about how can you include women. It becomes more of that kind of conversation. And I think I know people in my church who feel differently on this. They might not even agree with what I just said, but I get the sense in the way the elders handle it. They're always thinking of ways in which how can we include women, not in a patronizing sort of way. My pastor was having this conversation with me, like, how can we use your gifts even more, rather than what can you not do? Like, can we just keep adding a list of things that you shouldn't do? And I think genuinely, if they had their way, there would probably be women be able to do a lot more than maybe they do in my church at the moment. So, but they have a heart. I get the sense of God, that like heart of humility and heart for serving and encouraging the whole body, and recognizing that we just need men and women. And that's part of, like, I think what complementarianism should be. And the beauty of that is we should work together for the good of the church, and use the gifts. There's nothing in there that says the gifts of teaching or whatever. I don't know, people say ridiculous things like, well, you can teach your children, but only like, below a certain age, and then it just becomes, now you're just making stuff up, so
once they get to 7, you can't teach them. Yeah, they're too advanced for that. Yeah,
where do you stop? So I'm still working out my theology on this whole issue, but and it's something I hold again loosely. So I think I'm surrounded by more egalitarian friends than complementarian ones. So it's an interesting one, and I just don't think it's something to disfellowship over. It's an important issue in the sense that it's good to know what you believe and why, because it probably shapes what kind of church you go to. But a secondary issue in that, I'm like, I just don't even waste so much energy having those debates, because I'm just like, guys, I live in a secular country. Like, people need to hear about Jesus. This is honestly the list of my problems right now. It just isn't a priority on my list.
That's great. Dan, you lent in. I thought you were preparing for another question.
No. I think I think views of complementarianism are so they're influenced by people's experience. And I think, like you said, like when you had a church leader sort of saying you shouldn't be CU leader because you're a woman. Mm-hmm. They're the kind of folks that sort of, as someone who holds, I would sort of consider myself broadly complementarian, in the sense that really I just think I find it hard to read the Bible in a way in terms of my hermeneutics of seeing eldership as not as a male position. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I literally think women should be doing everything else. Mm-hmm. Like you said, the gifts are not distributed. Does it say, in Ephesians about the different the gifts distributed by sex? So that's probably I'm probably complementarian light in that sense. And other than that, I just think women should be doing absolutely everything, because they're just as gifted and as anyone else. But beyond that, I think it's when like you said, with people trying to limit what women can, what women are permitted to do, it gets quite murky, and And yeah, and like you said, I think the way you describe it as Christian sort of patriarchy is I would be deeply uncomfortable around people like that. It's not probably a church I would feel comfortable being part of.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, and it's important to know. I mean, Rebecca from Bread of Life has just said that, and I'm well aware of that view, Rebecca.
Yeah.
I think that's thanks for being honest with that. And
I totally sympathize with that, because I've seen the ugly side. I think because I've seen the beautiful side. I wouldn't say that and be like, well, take my experience and therefore and diminish somebody else's like negative experience. So whilst I describe my own positive experience, and I think this is how it should be, I recognize that very often it just isn't. And I personally know many women in that kind of situation. So yeah, I hear you, and yeah, it's sad that's the case.
I think on that is this definitely seems to be a reckoning, at least within complementarian circles. At least if to be wary of how much I read on Twitter, but there's definitely this conversation raising its head with how people like Beth Moore's been treated, and that kind of conversation. I'm surprised it's taken this long for that to be rooted out as an unbiblical position to only have women able to teach in as the setting of only women, and that is still being defended and fought over is infuriating.
So odd. Imagine
it is odd. I've learned so much from so many.
It's so odd. I can't imagine. It feels so foreign to me, saying that women can only teach other women.
Yeah.
It just strikes me as just deeply odd. Like, you wouldn't. What other context would you have that? Like, it's such an odd view. Like, of course, like, I'm learning from you now. Like, should this be? Some complementarians might have a problem with this now.
Yeah.
How are you teaching us?
Yeah.
How did my mum teach me? It's a bit bizarre. And I think just following on from the other question on this, and it kind of leads into. I realise I haven't asked you how long you have in Inonge. We usually aim for an hour and a half. We're almost there. Do you have time for a few more questions?
Yeah.
Cool. The question is, do you think churches who deny women leadership are unhealthy? Is it a sign of an unhealthy church? I would argue yes. Just on this point, it's brought something. I've been reading Church Called Tove by a guy named Scott McKnight, and I'd highly recommend it. But he had a quote that stuck in my mind, is that the toxicity of a church can be measured by how it treats its women. And that I found that quite, as I said, complementary, similar to Dan. It seems like similar to your experience in Inonge, which I'm glad to hear. Just trying to
Well, actually, interestingly enough, the video that she's referring to, it was an egalitarian church I had in mind for that. I was actually referring to spiritual abuse. So I've recently started a charity dealing with probably what I had in mind more as just like sexual abuse that happened in a complementarian church. But for that particular video, and if you watch it, I'm slightly angry. I watched it back like a few weeks ago. I was like, oh man, it was fresh in my mind. So I was like, rah! There was men and women. I think more women than men actually, leading and the spiritual abuse was terrible, and the fallout from that was horrific. And so that's what motivated me to do that. So I think that's what convinces me. I think there's a way in which complementarian a complementarian setup, and even the word complementarian, I don't even like using it anymore because it's so broad and clearly it just means something different now from what I'm thinking in my head. It's tainted, but like, there are certain complementarian structures that make that, I think, make abuse right, because it's, they say, well, men are the protectors and women are to be protected by men, and they see that as an ontological thing. But what often happens when abuse is revealed is that the men, the protectors, protect each other because they're for the grace of God I go type thing, and all sorts of theological language is used to defend it. So I think where you have the sort of complementarianism where women are actually devalued under the guise of theology, and with the Bible to justify it, then it's a recipe for disaster, because they're not going to be heard. And it's a kind of church where women are sent back to abusive homes because they must be submissive. So I think there's a certain kind of complementarianism, the what I'm defining as, where they root it in a doctrine called eternal subordination of the Son, like Trinitarian heresy, where it's rooted in that, then absolutely I would say that. But I think in general, that, like, I've just from my experience, like it hasn't even mattered what kind of church it is. There's always where you have people that are held in such a high regard, that the Bible isn't taken seriously in such a way that people love Jesus and love his people. There's all sorts of ways in which that can be ripe for abuse. But I think, I think just whatever camp you're in, like, what does it look like? I think it would look, the church I was referring to that was egalitarian, maybe was more subtle in how that looked. I don't know how they would handle a situation of domestic abuse. I don't know how they would respond to that. And then in a complementarian church, maybe with that kind of, whatever you are on the spectrum, I think it's just helpful to ask, how can this be abused? How are we set up? Are we set up in such a way, if abuse happened in this context, and how we're set up, how would that work? I mean, if you just have men doing everything and women aren't involved at all, and you have a woman that's been abused, like, they're gonna come to like a panel of men to like talk about, there's all sorts of things to think through. So I think it's important, not just, I think it's too simplistic to say it's just a complementarian thing per se. But at the same time, I don't think we should just be like, well, complementarian theology is good and we should, and therefore it shouldn't be an issue. I think, if I was being honest, I would say then that, there are ways in which sexual abuse in particular can flourish in a complementarian setting if it's set up in a certain way, even if it's not, even if it's well set up, and that's another conversation.
In defense of complementarianism, in a sense, I think it's not always just complementarianism or egalitarianism. It's more about the individual's view of leadership as well, as a leader, an authoritarian leadership. You can have an authoritarian leader in an egalitarian church, as much as you can get one in a complementarian church. And I think when you have that structure where, and I've seen this a lot in Pentecostal church, actually Pentecostals and Reformed churches, not to discover my own sort of experiences, is where it's been tipped up, whereas Jesus came to serve. And leaders sell themselves as being served, and when that's inculcated into the church culture about, it's very clear that
it's almost like a hierarchy, like priesthood,
like things like a priest. God speaks to them, and then maybe it will come down to us, a sort of Moses-like figure, and that, for me, whatever structure you've got, if that's in place, that is a situation that's ripe for spiritual abuse or any kind of abuse. And that's what should be avoided. And I think that's the thread that I've seen with anything, within, when we've seen abuses, abusive leadership and things, and that's somewhere I would feel deeply uncomfortable and very concerned about that, and that's quite common in particular. And I think sometimes that's cultural as well, in the sense, we come to certain cultures where a leader is put on a pedestal.
Revered,
that's absorbed into Christian culture. Again, one of those things where actually I think we should reject it or redeem it, and that gets Christianized, and I think that you have a culture of fear and things like that. Sorry, I've gone off topic, but I think that's just worth. I think it's authoritarian leadership, whether that's a woman or whether that's a man. That's somewhere that's ripe for abuse and deeply unbiblical, because it's switched that hierarchy upside down.
I think there's a quote from the book that's saying as well, that was like, basically, if you've got an authoritarian leader, they're more likely to put themselves in the position of Jesus rather than the disciples. So they'll be like, I'm the David, I'm the Moses, I'm the Jesus figure. rather than I'm the people of God, I'm the disciples, I'm the one that keeps denying Christ by accident or on purpose because I'm scared, or like, and yeah, it's such a necessary aspect of finding a leader who fits the bill, like
what the Bible says. I was
Yeah.
having this conversation with somebody. I think just coming back to the complementarianism thing, one of the reasons maybe it like general broad evangelicalism is the kind of leaders that we have promoted and revered, like in our bid for expository teaching, skilled orators, and we've kind of abandoned that biblical description of like the qualifications around, isn't it? Like most of those things, I think one thing says able to teach, everything else is like character stuff, gentleness and humility and self-sacrifice and all of those things. So I think what you say there, Dan, about like authority is like, okay, if they are like that anyway, regardless of what context, then you've got a recipe for disaster there and spiritual abuse.
I always think, would they wash your feet? The test, like, can you imagine if you're at a church? Can you imagine would the pastor wash your feet? Jesus would wash his followers' feet, and if you can imagine a lot of church, I think it's the opposite. I think the pastor would have his feet washed by the congregation. I don't think he would ever touch the congregation's feet. And for me, that's that sort of test, that test of humility. Would they wash your feet? Can you imagine the person you want to be an elder or a pastor washing your feet? If you can't, that's probably the wrong person. For me, that their ability to teach is always subsumed by humility,
I think there are some translations that's teachable, so even that is a character trait, a sign of humility than necessarily teachability, in the sense of you're able to teach others.
Can you imagine Mark Driscoll washing someone's feet?
We're naming names, are we? All right.
Well, it's well known.
He went there.
He's already gone again. And this is someone I love listening to Doctrine, his teaching series, years ago. So I was, he
was quite popular in the.
He's a well-known example, I think, like, as someone who, as an authoritarian leader, and I think I've read enough now to kind of, the evidence is there. He's not a feet washer.
Yeah, well, it's the circles we swam in down when we were.
He's not a feet washer.
He's not a feet washer.
When he was big, it was also Bill Hybels and the Bill Hybels book on leadership that was very much out of business and organizational structures rather than out of a servant heart that builds others up, that seeks all those things. I mean, there's so many examples in Inonge of your own experience of how any leader should be leading. Like, I can see your gifts. I could go to that conference, but actually I want you to go to that conference. And it's giving up the platform so that others can be seen above you is what leaders should be doing more and more. So Owen, you're talking about your heart is for these this charity. That's the word I'm trying to find. Charity for survivors of abuse. Tell us a bit. Plug away. Like, what is this charity? What are you doing with it? And how can people find it, support it, get on board with it? And then we'll close off with our last question after that.
So it's called Restored Hope Zambia. So it's a charity that's going to be working in Zambia, like, surprise, to support survivors of church abuse. So it's quite specific, thinking there of like clergy abuse. And it came off the back of, again, trying to help some friends who had been abused in the context of a church setting, and them not having anywhere to go, to, just, I think when they, talked about what happened, some of the responses they received were really unhelpful. Some of the things were cultural, like, Zambian culture and how it deals with abuse. Like, we don't want to ruin people's reputation, think about your family name, those kinds of things. But also some things that I would say would happen in any culture with church abuse, where it's like, the person in power, holds all the cards, and, they might not necessarily get the victims don't get the justice that they should. So I tried to help. Long story short, it just wasn't really going anywhere, and I just felt I can't just do nothing. So I started this charity to support survivors through counseling. Accessing that is really difficult in Zambia, like getting qualified people to receive that help, and getting the access to justice. Again, people think that that's not something you should do. So if it's a man of God or a pastor, like somehow people think that if you're a Christian or a pastor or whatever, you're immune to the consequences of the law. So that is one of the main areas that I'm really passionate about, and justice. So you just access to that as well. Also equipping the church. In the UK, we've got safeguarding legislation as a bare minimum to help people. You wouldn't have a scenario, well, not deliberately, where you have somebody that is just meeting with young girls and nobody's questioning that. And if somebody came up and say they were being abused, you would have an obligation, if you're a church leader, to report that to authorities. I've just discovered that obligation doesn't exist in Zambia, so that makes sense of a lot of things. I think the only legal obligation in one piece of legislation is that you should inform the victim of their rights. People wouldn't even know what those rights are. So there's a lot to do. I'm not starting because abuse doesn't happen in other countries. Some people have been like, oh, does it happen a lot in Zambia? Like, Zambia is like abuse central. No, it happens everywhere. But it's easier to happen because those safeguarding measures aren't in place, and it's much harder for accountability to happen because, again, there are no obligations or legal obligations for reporting, and the legal system is an absolute shambles. And people just economically and also professionally, there's just little access for people to get help. So if you can imagine somebody that's a survivor, they're not gonna say anything because what's going to be the point? Like, nobody will believe me, and even if they do, I'll probably get blamed, and then I'm dealing with all this trauma. There's nowhere to go for it. So that's my heart, really, just to kind of deal with everything holistically and challenge some of the theological underplayings that people bring. Matthew 18, we should just not all sorts of things. Just like, I'm like, wow, we just need to do a lot. It's big, it's ambitious, but I just needed to do something. So that's what I've done. So it's an official NGO, got registered, and I've set up a Scottish charity, which also official now as of last week, to support the Zambian charity financially. So at the moment, you won't find anything, no websites, because we're not operational yet. And I think people are, oh, why are we not started? And I'm just aware of the magnitude of what we're doing. So there's a lot of work being done behind the scenes to get the right policies and the right structures in place to start off with, so that we don't become the problem as well. So there's a GoFundMe, Restore Hope Zambia, that you can kind of give to, just to help with startup costs. I want to have premises so that things are done well and properly from the word go. Want to have staff that are properly trained to take calls or emails or whatever. So that's what the GoFundMe is. But I think I've put an update on the GoFundMe if you want to support the work. Once a Scottish charity is set up and can receive money legally, which is not yet the case, there will be a website and all of that. And I will send an email. If you fill in your details on the form on the GoFundMe, then you can absolutely do that long term. But in a nutshell, that's Restored Hope Zambia.
Amazing. I've found the fundraiser link. I've put it into the live chat. We'll put it in the description as well. So
we'll share it around on Facebook as well, can't we?
Yeah, definitely. And it's so good to. It's interesting you brought Matthew 18 up. Just there needs to be work done in English churches, and I'm sure Scottish. Like the idea that works for a survivor of sexual abuse to then go back to the perpetrator and try and restore them. Like what? What world?
Honestly,
Jesus was more clever than that. Like, come on, let's work that through. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you, Inonge. We've had a few comments saying just thank you for your insight and clear understanding. There's that challenge of washing feet that came from Dan, which had a comment on. So. Thanks for your time, Dan. Is there anything else? Any final? We haven't asked our last question.
No, so you're getting ahead of yourself here.
Sorry, Dan, ask it.
Well, I was just going to say what we always like to ask. We're both sort of vociferous readers, so we hope people listen. Christians should read books, read the Bible, but also read books. So we always like to get recommendations from our people interviewing, just maybe a book or two that they think that Christians should read, and maybe someone that maybe they haven't heard of who they should check out and find out more about.
Or podcast, if you're a podcaster. We can,
or podcasts as well.
Other podcasts. We're not like only listen to us. Feel free to listen to other
people. I'm reading a book. Forgotten the title. The history of the African. I'll find it and send it to you guys later. The history of the church in Africa. It's like an old book, like I think 1995 or something. But it just details like the history, like just to deal with the whole Christianity is a white man's religion. I just wanted to properly read like the history. So that's what I'm reading at the moment. I don't read that much. I would love to, because I like to learn, but if I would find a way of just downloading the information, that would be great. So a podcast, exactly. Podcasts are my thing. If I could find a nice church, I think there is a church history podcast, but I don't know how much it tackles in African history, but I'll need to find it. I love Black Berea is my new. It's not new anymore because I've known about it for like 6 months now, but it's one of my favorite because it's British. Like, see, there's so many podcasts that are like, every time I find a British podcast that's Christian, I'm like, yay! I'm like overly enthusiastic and I've got nothing against America, but
there aren't that many. There aren't that many.
They're not. So anytime I find one, I'm like, follow, share. So Black Berea is great. Just they're based in London, and I get their banter because it's like, you're funny, you guys. And just they just talk about theology, the church, everything. So that would be my one recommendation if you want looking for a new podcast to listen to.
Yeah, I'm going to add that. So I just typed it into Google, so I'm going to make sure remind me to download that because I'm always looking for good podcasts, especially like you said, British ones. The only one I regularly listen to that's English is Mere Fidelity.
That's pretty good.
That's only half English, really.
It's half English. You've got Speak Life.
Speak Life. Yeah.
Speak Life is very good. Speak Life is very good. Inonge, have you come across Vince Bantu's book, A Multitude of All Peoples?
I think I've saved it in a folder where I've taken screenshots of books I should buy, but
because that's got a lot of stuff about Africa as well, and that comes it's on my reading list. I actually only added it from another previous interviewer. I can't remember who recommended that, but I'm going to try and order that soon, and that looks excellent in terms of the scope of Claire Williams. That's it. Yeah, Claire Williams has recommended that. Yeah, Vince Bantu. Yeah,
love Claire.
Yeah,
she's great. She's good.
Dan, there's a personal question here just for you. Have you read Rebecca's book, Bridges of Love and Understanding, yet? That she sent
halfway through it. It's over there in my box.
Hey,
right, it's right next to me. Yeah, so I've been making.
I was hoping for an awkward, not yet.
No. Well, I mean, technically, I haven't finished it, but I'm enjoying it and taking my time. It's a great book.
Yeah. Awesome. So we're going to close off there. Inonge, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm sure we'll hopefully have you on again sometime and hear about your charity and how it's been going and more. There's loads of stuff that we could talk about, and thanks for your time.
Thank you both. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Inonge.
No worries. So thanks for watching. Thanks for being part of this. If you've enjoyed it, please do share and like, subscribe, all those things. Make sure you tell anyone and everyone about us. We're going to be here anyway, even if no one else joins us. And we just enjoy these conversations. Hope you learned something. Hopefully you've challenged you a little bit. I've been challenged as well. And we'll be here hopefully in a few weeks' time. We've got a couple of people lined up that we're just confirming. So watch this space. We'll have another chat soon. Thanks again, and good night.